If you live in Seattle or anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, there is one earthquake you've been told to fear: Cascadia, the offshore megafault, the magnitude 9, the tsunami. It dominates disaster planning, emergency preparedness budgets, and public anxiety about earthquakes across the entire region. Entire government agencies have been organized around it. Billions of dollars in infrastructure planning have been shaped by it. The phrase, "the big one" in the Pacific Northwest means one thing and one thing only: Cascadia. But in January 2026, a USGS geologist who has spent years literally digging up the ground beneath Seattle published a peer-reviewed study with a finding that reframes everything. A major earthquake on the fault running directly beneath Seattle, not Cascadia offshore, would likely be more destructive to the city than the Cascadia event everyone has been preparing for. That fault ruptured approximately 190 years ago. Its recurrence interval is 350 years, and it has been left out of the official US Seismic Hazard Model entirely. This is the Seattle Fault Zone. And it is the earthquake threat 4 million people in the Seattle area have largely never heard of. The Seattle Fault Zone runs east to west, directly beneath Seattle, beneath Elliott Bay, beneath Bainbridge Island, and continuing east under the Cascade foothills. It is not a single clean fault. It is a complex zone, multiple faults at different depths, some shallow, some blind, interacting in ways that scientists are still mapping. The main fault in the zone is what geologists call blind. It doesn't reach the surface. You can't see it. You can't walk to where it crops out. Its existence was only confirmed in the 1990s through indirect evidence, subsurface imaging, magnetic surveys, the preserved signatures of past earthquakes in the sediment record. But the study published in January 2026 is not about the main fault. It is about secondary faults within the zone, specifically two newly mapped structures called the Lytle Beach and Vasa Park faults, shallow faults. Faults that do reach the surface and leave physical scars on the landscape when they rupture. Here's how the Seattle Fault Zone fits into the bigger picture. The entire region from Portland to Vancouver, BC, is being compressed. The crust is being squeezed as the Juan de Fuca plate pushes against the North American continent. That compression creates strain. Strain builds up constantly and releases periodically as earthquakes. The Seattle Fault Zone absorbs approximately 15% of all that strain. It is not a bystander in regional tectonics. It is an active participant carrying a significant load. And the secondary faults within it have now been shown to rupture approximately every 350 years. Here's what makes this finding genuinely alarming. These secondary faults are short. Because they are short, they don't meet the minimum length requirement to be included in the National Seismic Hazard Model, the official US framework that determines building codes, insurance rates, emergency planning budgets, and infrastructure investment across the country. The USGS scientist running this study is pointing out that faults he considers dangerous are excluded from the model designed to protect the people living above them. 4 million people, not in the hazard model. Before we go further, are you in Seattle, Bainbridge Island, or anywhere in the Puget Sound area? Drop your location below. We want to know how many people watching this are living directly above what we're covering. To understand what the Seattle Fault Zone is capable of, you need to know what happened approximately 1,100 years ago. Around 900 CE, the main fault ruptured, the estimated magnitude somewhere between 7.0 and 7.5, and what it did to the landscape was not subtle. The Seattle shoreline rose by up to 23 feet in minutes, permanently. The ground on the north side of the fault lurched upward while the south side dropped. Entire forests were buried under landslides generated by the shaking. A tsunami radiated across Puget Sound, the enclosed water body amplifying the wave and sending it into shorelines that had no warning and no escape. The evidence is still visible today. Ghost forests, trees killed by sudden subsidence, their roots preserved in mud for over 1,000 years, exposed when scientists dig trenches across fault scarps to read what the ground has recorded. That event reshaped the physical geography of the Seattle area in a matter of seconds. A city built on that ground today would face something its engineers have never had to model at full scale. But that was the main fault. The new study isn't about the main fault. It's about the secondary faults, the ones that have been quietly rupturing on a completely different and much shorter timeline. And the most recent one appears to have fired around 1833. The methodology the research team used to find this is worth understanding, because it's the kind of detective work that makes geology compelling. Along the trace of the newly mapped secondary faults, there is a wetland. Trees grow in wetlands until the ground shifts beneath them. When a fault ruptures at the surface, it changes drainage patterns, raises or lowers the water table, kills root systems. The trees die, their remains are preserved in the sediment. Dr. Stephen Angster and his team used radiocarbon dating and tree ring cross-referencing on dead tree snags preserved in this wetland. The results pointed to a single event, approximately 1833 CE, not 1,100 years ago, not geological deep time, 190 years ago. Your great-great-grandparents were alive. The United States was 57 years old. Andrew Jackson was president. The secondary faults in the Seattle Fault Zone rupture approximately every 350 years. 190 years have passed since the last known event. That means this fault system is just over halfway through its current cycle, with potentially 160 years of continued loading ahead before the next average rupture window. But recurrence intervals are averages, not guarantees of spacing. The fault doesn't know what year it is. It ruptures when the stress exceeds the strength of the rock. That could be in 160 years. It could be sooner. And the USGS scientist who found this isn't staying quiet about what it means. Dr. Angster's assessment in the study and in subsequent interviews is direct. In his own words, a major Seattle Fault Zone earthquake is likely to be more destructive for Seattle than a Cascadia subduction zone event. That statement deserves to sit for a moment because it inverts the entire public understanding of earthquake risk in the Pacific Northwest. Here's the physics behind it. Cascadia produces a magnitude 9. That is an enormous amount of energy, but Cascadia is offshore, 70 to 100 miles from Seattle. The seismic waves have to travel that distance through the crust before they reach the city. They arrive as long-period rolling motion, the kind that causes nausea, knocks things off shelves, and goes on for minutes. Damaging, terrifying, but not the worst case for buildings. The Seattle Fault Zone is directly beneath the city. When it ruptures, the energy doesn't travel to Seattle. It detonates underneath it. Short-period violent shaking, the kind that destroys structures rather than just shaking them. And there's an amplifier built into the geology that makes this even worse. Seattle sits in a sedimentary basin, a bowl of soft sediments and glacial deposits over bedrock. When seismic waves hit this basin, they are trapped, reflected, and amplified. The basin acts like a resonance chamber. Shaking that would be moderate in hard rock becomes significantly more intense inside the basin. This is why the 2001 Nisqually earthquake, a magnitude 6.8 that originated 32 miles deep, far enough that most of its energy dissipated before reaching the surface, still caused $2 billion in damage and was felt across 3 states. That was a deep earthquake that had already lost most of its energy. A shallow Seattle fault rupture, directly beneath the basin, is a categorically different event. The National Seismic Hazard Model shapes almost every consequential decision about earthquake risk in the United States. Building codes are derived from it. Insurance premiums are calculated against it. Emergency management budgets are allocated based on what it says is most likely. When a city decides how much to spend retrofitting old buildings versus building new infrastructure, it is implicitly trusting this model to have identified the threats correctly. The secondary faults of the Seattle Fault Zone are not in it. They don't meet the minimum fault length threshold to qualify for inclusion. Angster describes them as faults that some think cannot generate significant earthquakes, but then immediately notes that the paleoseismic evidence shows they have generated significant earthquakes, and they do so more frequently than the faults that are in the model. The city of Seattle is currently in the middle of a push to retrofit unreinforced masonry buildings, triggered in part by the 25th anniversary of the 2001 Nisqually earthquake and renewed awareness of seismic vulnerability. That push matters, but the scale of the remaining problem is significant. Approximately 1,100 unreinforced masonry buildings remain in Seattle. These are exactly the structures that fail catastrophically in shallow, high-frequency earthquakes. The 1994 Northridge earthquake, magnitude 6.7, shallow, directly beneath a populated area, collapsed parking structures, sheared apartment buildings, and caused 57 deaths and $25 billion in damage. Northridge is the closest analog to what a Seattle fault rupture would look like. And Northridge hit the San Fernando Valley. not a city center sitting inside a sedimentary basin with 1,100 unreinforced masonry buildings and a port handling $75 billion in annual cargo. Here is the honest, data-supported assessment of where things stand. The Seattle Fault Zone's secondary faults last ruptured around 1833. The recurrence interval is approximately 350 years. There is time, potentially significant time, before the next event falls within the average window. Nobody is saying evacuate Seattle. Nobody is saying this rupture is imminent. What the study published in January 2026 is saying is that these faults have been systematically underestimated, excluded from hazard models, underfunded in research, and overshadowed by the more dramatic and more distant Cascadia narrative, and that the lead USGS scientist studying them considers them likely to cause more destruction in Seattle than the fault everyone has been preparing for. Cascadia deserves its reputation. When it goes, it will be one of the largest natural disasters in American history, a regional catastrophe stretching from Northern California to British Columbia. But Seattle will shake hard from Cascadia, and then the recovery will begin. A Seattle fault rupture at shallow depth, directly beneath a city of 750,000 people sitting in a sedimentary basin that amplifies ground motion, with 1,100 unreinforced buildings, a critical port, and emergency response infrastructure that has never been tested at that scale. That is the scenario that keeps the researchers who actually study it up at night. Not Cascadia, the fault that is already there, already loaded, already 190 years into a 350-year cycle, right underneath the city,